Chapter 171 Because I Love You. Don't leave, he whispered harshly, catching her arm and stopping her from leaving. Not in this condition. Mia looked up into his deep gray eyes, and for the first time, she wasn't so certain he was handling this departure as easily as she thought. Putting his hand against the side of her face, he smoothed her hair back and said solemnly, "The only foolish thing you've done in the last week is caring too much about me. Everything else you said and did was right. It was perfect, Mia." Closing her eyes, fighting back tears, Mia turned her face into his hand and kissed his palm as he'd kissed hers once before. She whispered against it, "I care about you because I love you so much." He jerked his hand away so quickly, like he'd been burned, and his voice turned condescendingly amused. "You don't love me, Harrison. You're too naive and inexperienced, and you don't even know the difference between good sex and real love. Now, be a good girl, go home where you belong, and forget about me. That's exactly what I want you to do. I don't want your love." Mia felt as if he'd slapped her with those words. She wanted to weep and ask if everything he'd done to her was out of love, but her wounded pride forced her not to act foolish. Instead, she raised her chin up and stepped away from him. "You're right, Mr. Weiner," she said with quiet dignity, getting into her car. "It's time I returned to my reality." Saying that, she didn't wait for his response and started the car. Without looking at him, she rolled up the window and drove away from him. Neil watched her car disappear around the first curve and vanish from his view between the towering pine trees. He remained there long after she was gone, until the freezing wind finally forced him to remember that he was standing outside without a coat. He'd hurt her because he had to do it, he reminded himself again as he turned to the house. He couldn't let her waste one extra moment of her precious life loving him, or missing him, or waiting for him. He'd done the right thing, the noble thing, by ridiculing her love and sending her away. Neil went into the kitchen, listlessly picked up the coffee pot, and reached for a mug from the cabinet. Then he saw the mug Mia had used that morning, sitting on the countertop. He reached out slowly and picked it up, then he pressed the rim to his cheek whispering, "I think I love you, too." Hours after Mia left the mountain house, she pulled the car off onto the side of the highway and reached for the thermos on the seat beside her, which Neil had filled and carefully kept for her. Her throat and eyes hurt from the tears she refused to shed, and her mind was dazed from her futile effort to block out the painful memory of his parting words. "I don't want your love." Her hands shook with misery as she poured the coffee into the top of the thermos. Her eyes burned so bad she wanted to cry, but she held back by biting down hard on her lower lip. How cruel of him to ridicule her love for him that way, particularly when he knew she had to face the authorities and the press as soon as she got back to Mirage Mesa. Why couldn't he have either ignored her words or lied and said he loved her, too, just so she would have something to cling to during the ordeal ahead? It would have been so much easier for her to face that if he'd only said he loved her. "I don't want your love." Mia tried to swallow the coffee, but it stuck in her constricted throat as another painful realization hit her, leaving her more desolate and bewildered than before. Despite his having mocked her feelings, Neil had to have known full well that she really did love him. In fact, he was so sure of it that he had assumed he could let her go, and she'd still go home and not betray him to the authorities. He knew that she loved him so much and would give anything to him, that he'd assumed she'd give her body to him whenever he'd wanted. And she also knew he was right, too. As hurt as she was by his coldness, she could never attempt to betray him. She loved him too much to want to hurt him, and her belief in his innocence and her desire to protect him from going back to prison were, strangely enough, every bit as strong now as they'd been yesterday. And she would protect him no matter what. A car shot by her, splashing slush against the side of her car, and she remembered his warning to get as far away as possible without attracting any attention. Wearily, she sat up and resumed to drive, looking over her shoulder to make certain it was safe to pull out onto the highway. She drove the BMW at a normal speed, because Neil had warned her not to speed. And because she intended to do everything he'd said, she didn't speed. 1 hour later, Mia made it to the Avalora border in much less time than it had taken when she was driving Neil to the mountain. Following all of Neil's instructions, she stopped the car at the first rest stop and made a call to the first person's number she could think of. Owen answered the call on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting her calls. "Owen," she said, "I'm on my way home. I'm free now, thank heavens." He exploded. "What about that son of a bitch? Where is he? Did he do anything to you, sweetheart? In all these years, she'd never known to hate being called sweet names by Owen until now. Even though she wanted to voice out and tell him she was no longer engaged to him because she'd taken off his ring and somehow lost it in the mountains, she held back. And before she could think of something to reply to his words, an unfamiliar voice broke in. "Hello, Miss Harrison. This is Jason Wallace from the military. Where are you? Are you with Wayner?" asked Jason, whom Mia hadn't seen nor heard from in the past 5 years. "I'm in Avalora at a rest stop. I'm free. I mean, he left me in the car with the keys, blindfolded. But he's gone. I'm sure he's gone. I don't know where," she said, sounding as nervous as she could. "Listen carefully," Jason advised. "Get back into your car, lock the doors, and leave immediately. Wayner is a psychopath. He might return. Do not remain in the vicinity where you last saw him. Drive to the nearest populated area and contact the authorities. I will inform the military, and they will come to take you into custody for your safety. Now, get out of there." Displeased with Jason's tone, which made Neil seem like a dangerous wild animal on the loose, Mia responded angrily, "I am not going to the authorities or the military. I want to go home, rest, and I will drive straight there." She abruptly ended the call and restarted her car again, ignoring her phone when it continued to ring. 2 hours later, when she entered the Mirage Mesa border, a helicopter that had obviously been searching for the distraught hostage who was on her way home somehow spotted her car and hovered overhead. Minutes after she noticed it, countless black cars began racing onto the highway from every angle, positioning themselves in front and behind her, forming a motorcade to escort her home. The moment she exited her car, she was surrounded by men in black suits stepping out of their cars. Before she could even react, she saw Owen walking out of his white Lamborghini and hurrying towards her in his home attire, his right hand shoved inside his coat pocket. In long, determined strides, he reached her and pulled her into his embrace like a lover would his woman. He inhaled her scented hair and breathed in relief. "You are safe. I was worried sick." He tightened his hold around her, but then she awkwardly moved away from him, looking around them at the authorities and the bodyguards surrounding them, saying, "Can I go home now? I am not ready for any questioning. I'm tired." Owen, not noticing how much she was trying to avoid his touch, nodded his head. "Sure, I came here to take you home," he said, then looked back at his men and yelled out, "Clear the way, my fiancé is not ready to meet the reporters." Fiancé, she thought with an inner grimace, quietly following him into his white Lamborghini. She'd already decided to cut off her engagement with Owen, but seeing how he'd come all the way to escort her home and protect her from the media, she felt a little guilty and more determined to end the relationship so she wouldn't feel bad about her rejection of his affectionate actions. At this point, she wasn't in the state of mind to deal with another emotional roller coaster, nor was she ready to meet the reporters, whom she could already spot from afar with cameras. She wanted to go home and sleep until she could no longer think nor worry about Neil. Even though she could see from Owen's expression that he wanted to ask her a lot of questions and how she'd ended up meeting Neil, she pretended not to notice and instead leaned back on the car seat and closed her eyes with both her fists clenched at her sides to hold back whatever emotions were threatening to burst out. "Are you all right?" asked Owen, who'd finally noticed something strange about the woman beside him from how she was sitting away from him on the seat. She sat so far away into the corner, like she wanted to leave as much space between them as possible. Even though he was dying to ask if that son of a bitch had touched or done something to her, he held back. He would ask her everything when she would be well rested. She didn't even bother to open her eyes as she nodded to his question, then turned away to face the window. He didn't have to be told to know that there was something different about their relationship, and he confirmed it when his eyes fell on her ring finger that had no ring. His blue eyes darkened dangerously and he acted impulsively before he could stop himself. He grabbed her wrist. "Where is your ring?" he demanded coolly. Chapter 172 Break off the engagement. Mia's closed eyes suddenly snapped open. She found herself staring blankly at her hand, held by Owen, noticing the savage look in his eyes as he questioned her about the ring. A nervous shiver ran down her back as she contemplated telling him about her feelings for Neil now, rather than waiting until later. Despite her anxiety, she somehow believed he would understand and forgive her for betraying him and cutting off their engagement in such an inappropriate manner. He might hate her for this, but it was worth it, even if it meant having to pretend she was okay with his loving and caring gesture. She wouldn't be able to stand it one last time if he were to call her sweetheart. As she braced herself to speak, Owen, who'd been angry a moment ago when he didn't see the ring on her finger, softened his expression and preempted her with a gentle tone, suggesting, "Did you lose it when he kidnapped you? It's understandable. I will get you another one and make that animal pay for what he put you through. I will ensure that I ruin. He has a name, Owen," Mia interjected before she could stop herself. She had been unsettled by his previous derogatory remarks about Neil. "Neil Wayner is his name. He did nothing to harm me. You don't have to ruin him or worsen his situation. And just so you know, I didn't lose the ring. I took it off," she informed him, too displeased with him to care about how her harsh tone might impact him. "What?" he exclaimed, clasping her hand tightly as if struggling to believe her words. Mia winced as his grip tightened, observing his expression shift from shock to disbelief. "Why would you do that? Put it back on. There are reporters at your residence, and if they don't see the ring on your finger, they might assume the rumors about your romantic involvement with Wayner are true," he urged, releasing her hand and rummaging through her handbag in search of the ring. "Where is it?" he demanded in a controlled rage when he couldn't find it. Before he'd come here to pick up Mia, Owen had already made arrangements at her residence for the reporters to be there so that they could see how deeply in love the two of them were. He wanted to clear all sorts of rumors about her relationship with that psychopathic killer. He believed deep in his heart that his Mia loved only him and she'd never betray him. Whatever had happened between her and Neil in the past was in the past because she hated him now. Their marriage was going to be after Christmas, and even though she'd been gone, he hadn't stopped making arrangements for it. When he couldn't find the ring, he looked up at her questioningly and was met with an expression he knew so well. He suddenly had a strange feeling that she was about to tell him something that he'd forever be unable to accept. He could feel it in his heart that something was wrong with the look she was giving him. "There's something I want to tell you. I thought it could wait until I'm well rested, but now I think you need to know," she said, shifting on her seat to face him. But before she could prepare herself to tell him, the car was stopped by the military cars and the countless reporters roaming around the street to her residence in Mirage Mesa. "The military are here," Owen announced, suddenly delighted that the military were here. Although he'd told his guards not to allow any authorities nor military into Mia's residence until she was ready to meet them for questioning, now that she was about to tell him something he knew he wasn't ready to hear, despite the fact that Kelvin Rodrigo had warned him about this outcome, he was delighted with their arrival. He'd do anything to stop her from telling him whatever she'd planned to say, even if it meant keeping her busy until she would forget and remember his love for her. Wayner must have brainwashed her, and once he'd won her back, she'd remember she had no one but him in the world. "What are the military doing here at my house?" Mia asked, turning around to peek through the window, immediately spotting Jason walking towards the Lamborghini. Behind him was none other than Davina. Seeing the woman again after 5 years, Mia momentarily forgot about her ordeal and was consumed by a rage she didn't know she possessed until now. 5 years ago, when Neil had been sentenced to prison, Davina had approached her in the university and told her in detail how much Neil had only used her to complete his mission in Ivy Grove, and because of her, Mia's hatred towards him had mounted. Jason knocked at the tinted window of Mia's side of the car, and Owen rolled down the window without asking if she was okay with it. "Good afternoon, Miss Harrison," Jason said with a charming smile gracing his face as the window rolled down and revealed her to the reporters and the others outside. "It's been a while. I was expecting to see you in a terrible state, given how nervous you sounded on the phone, but it seems Wayner was a generous kidnapper." "Quite interesting, isn't it? What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Wallace?" Mia inquired, her dislike for her best friend's brother and the woman with him thinly veiled. "I'm not suggesting anything. If you don't mind, can we head inside your house and proceed with this as soon as possible?" "And if I do mind?" She bit harshly. "You won't mind, sweetheart," Owen cut in, placing his hand on her arm like a supportive partner. "Let them question you inside and get this over with," he said, smiling down at her as if to tell her to play along. Mia, however, was taken aback. Just the mere touch of him made her want to slap his face for daring to speak for her, like she couldn't decide what she wanted. And after her grueling drive, all she wanted was to be alone, but it seemed that too was impossible when she was surrounded by annoying people. She'd rather have preferred to be anywhere Neil was, even though he didn't love her, rather than be subjected to this. When Mia didn't speak and was only staring at Owen, he turned to speak to Jason. "You can head inside the house, Mr. Wallace. My fiancé and I will meet you there shortly. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Sullivan." Mia watched as Jason and Davina and their men walked into her gate, and she sat there, frozen, unable to believe Owen's audacity. What he did just now would be considered controlling. Was he trying to control her because he believed they were engaged? In the past, he'd done something like that when he tried to control her life, which had ended up in them breaking their friendship. "Let's go inside, let's not keep them waiting," he said, opening the car for her, and she automatically got out while silently making a mental note to tell him about their cut-off engagement the moment after her questioning. When Mia entered the warmth of her home, strangely it no longer felt like a home after her 1-week absence. From the windows, she could see the reporters and many guards going around, and she wanted nothing more than to be alone. Thus, she followed the soldiers to her dining hall where they were all seated, waiting to question her and probably accuse her of helping Neil Weiner. "Very well, Miss Harrison," Davina said, taking over as soon as they were seated. "Let's begin at the beginning." Mia felt a tiny tremor of fear when Jason reached into his pocket, removed a video recorder, and put it on the table in front of her. But she reminded herself of what Neil had told her to expect and faced Davina head-on. "Where do you want me to start?" she asked, smiling gratefully at her servant when she handed her a glass of warm milk from the side. "We already know you supposedly went to Novaria to interview Aurora Quinn, even though you don't normally travel to meet people, but the other way around," Davina began, trying to trap Mia with the fact that celebrities travel from all over the world to be on her show in Mirage Mesa, but she'd traveled to Novaria to meet Aurora. Mia's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, supposedly?" "There's no need to feel defensive," Jason quickly interposed in a soothing voice. "You tell us what happened. Let's start with when you first encountered Weiner." Mia crossed her arms on the table and tried not to feel any emotion at all as she told them how Neil had been crouching down beside her car when she first met him. "Did you notice it was him and if he was armed at that point?" "No. What was he wearing?" The questions came at her in rapid-fire successions after that, on, hour after hour, until she could barely keep up with some of them. "Miss Harrison, you must be able to remember something more about the location of the house he used for a hideout." That was Jason, who'd been watching her as if she was an insect under his microscope and using an authoritative tone of voice on her that reminded her a little of Neil when he was annoyed. Perhaps all soldiers were the same, but for some reason she found Neil's authoritative tone endearing while his annoying. "I told you, I was blindfolded. Then do you know where he is heading to now and what's his next plan?" Mia shook her head, but Jason snapped annoyingly at her, "Please answer aloud for the recorder." "All right," she said, abruptly deciding no man could be as gentle and as commanding at the same time like her poor Neil. Not even Owen, who sat beside her listening instead of supporting her. And their behavior made her wish more than ever that she'd never came back here, and it made her miss a warmth she could never get from anyone but her ice cube. "I did not ask him where he was going because he'd already told me that the less I knew, the safer he'd be." "And you want him to be safe after he killed your mother, don't you?" he said, pouncing on her answer. "You don't want to see him caught, do you?" The moment Jason was waiting for was here. He waited, tapping the end of his ballpoint pen on the table. He knew he'd trapped her, and if she slipped just a little, he'd take her into custody as Neil's accomplice. And by doing so, Weiner would come out of his hiding to save her. Just like 5 years ago when he tried to use Mia to get Neil to mess up his mission, he could still use her to get him back to prison before he'd find some ways to get fake evidence to prove that he was innocent. And once he did that, Jason knew Weiner would ruin his life the moment he was free of any charges. "I will never let that happen." Chapter 173 Old Photograph. Mia glanced out the dining room window at the reporters swarming in the yard and lining the street, feeling weariness crashing over her in waves. Neil had already prepared her for this, and she knew not to slip and disclose anything that could complicate matters for any of them. From what she gathered from Neil in the mountains, Jason was his rival in the military, and she didn't need to be told twice to know that the man was trying to make her slip. "I've already informed you, he is not a killer, and he attempted to save my life when he thought I'd died in the frozen river. That doesn't change the fact that he murdered your mother and 2 other individuals." Leaning back in her chair, Mia gazed at him with a mix of disdain and frustration. "I do not, even for a moment, believe that Neil is the murderer. Now, allow me to pose a question to you, Mr. Wallace." Disregarding Owen's warning squeeze on her knee at her confrontational tone, she continued, "Put yourself in my position and imagine for argument's sake that I had taken you as a hostage and you had managed to escape from me. You hide from me, but I believe you have fallen into a deep, icy river. From your hiding spot, you witness me rushing down to the river and plunging into that freezing water. I dive repeatedly, calling out your name, and when I fail to find you, you see me stumble out of the water and collapse in the snow. Instead of returning home on my snowbike, I give up. I expose my soaked shirt to the cold to hasten my demise, and I tilt my head back, shut my eyes, and remain there, allowing the falling snow to cover my head and face. As Mia fell silent, Jason raised his eyebrows. What are you getting at? My point is, she replied shortly, after witnessing that, would you believe that I could be capable of committing a murder in cold blood? Would you try to extract information from me that could lead to me being shot before I had a chance to prove my innocence? Is that what Wayner intends to do? He demanded, leaning forward. It's what I would do, she evaded. And you didn't answer my question. Would you, after you knew I tried to save your life and wanted to die when I thought I failed, try to wheedle information out of me so you could get me captured and probably killed in the process? I would feel compelled, Jason retorted, shrugging casually, to do my duty and help see that justice was done to a convicted murderer who also happens to be a kidnapper now. Mia looked at him for a long moment and said quietly, in that case, I can only hope that you find a heart donor because you obviously don't have one of your own, Mr. Wallace. Finally, after the nerve-wracking questioning that lasted for more than an hour, Mia was left alone in her house. Well, not completely alone, because Owen's men were still positioned outside, and the reporters were looming in the cold. She tried to sleep but was unable to, as her mind kept going back to Neil and what he planned to do, and if he would be able to clear his name. She had already decided to help him, even though he didn't want her help, by ensuring the citizens of their country continued to view him as a hero. Turning on her bed, she got up and headed to a room she hadn't allowed herself to open for years. She turned the doorknob and stepped into the dark room. Reaching for the light switch, she turned on the light, and the room where she had stored away everything she had ever owned in whispering way brightened up. The first thing her eyes fell on was the guitar that Neil had given her 5 years ago. Before she knew it, she walked towards it and picked it up in her hands. Running her fingers around the familiar strings, she felt her throat tighten with emotions. Sitting down on the floor, she hugged the guitar to her chest, trying her best not to shed tears of longing that had been threatening to burst forth ever since she had left the man she loved, and ever since he had told her he didn't want her love. As she sat there, holding back her tears, memories of their time in the mountains began to overwhelm her. She remembered the nights they'd shared, making love as if it were their last, the moments when he'd kiss her with genuine tenderness, and the times he held her close as if afraid of losing her. Those were the happiest days of her life in all these years. Without him, the emptiness in her chest seemed to grow deeper, and with him, everything in her life felt complete. He doesn't want my love, she muttered, her lips trembling. Her tears, which she'd struggled to contain, now flowed freely, her shoulders shaking as she clutched the guitar tightly. Muffled sobs filled the room as she tightened her arms around the instrument. She had promised herself not to cry over the love she'd lost, but the pain was so intense that she wished she had no heart. It hurt so much that she wished she had never experienced the joy of loving and being held every night by the man she loved. Tonight, she lay alone in bed after 6 days of sleeping in the warmth of his embrace. Perhaps her life had always meant to be lived alone. First she'd lost her only family, and now she'd lost her love. Wealth and riches meant nothing when you have no one to share them with. And now she wished she'd gotten to know the relatives her late mother had once told her about. Perhaps with family her pain wouldn't have run this deep, and the pain made her miss her mother so much she'd do anything to find the real murderer and clear Neil's name. Mia stood up and was about to put the guitar back in its position, while wiping off her tears and hurrying to leave the room that held old memories that made her heart ache every time she thought about them. But the butt of the guitar hit against a little box, and it fell open, spilling the content on the floor. Her eyes fell on the box, and she recognized it as one of her late mother's treasure boxes where old photos and treasured items were stored. Crouching down, she picked it up and placed it upright, and then began to absent-mindedly pick up the old photographs and papers that had fallen from it as her mind wandered to the press conference she'd be attending tomorrow to try her best to lessen Neil's case. About to place the photographs in the box without looking at them, as she thought they were the ones she'd seen many times before, her eyes fell on an unfamiliar one at the top, and she paused in her actions of closing the box. Frowning, She reached for the old photograph and her breath caught short in her lungs at what she saw. Trembling from disbelief, she stumbled backwards staring, trying to analyze the photo and how she happened to be in it. And the most strange thing was that, she was. Two of me in one photograph, she muttered in disbelief, staring at the two little girls with identical faces and trying desperately to imagine how that was possible. The two little girls were standing by her late mother's side, who sat between them. However, there were two other people, a couple standing at the back, but their faces had been stained with water and cleared away from the photograph. And the fact that they were in a mansion did nothing to make her understand what was happening and when this photo had been taken. Mia sat there staring at the photograph as if staring at it more than once would give her the answers to her questions. She stared at the photo so deeply until her vision began to slightly blur, and until she felt a pounding headache in her head that threatened to split her brain. The headache was so intense she fell backwards, clutching her head and trying to block out the memories that were suddenly about to burst forth from looking at the unfamiliar mansion. She's not my child. I didn't want her to have any emotions, she was never meant to have any, but look what you've caused, Ella. You let her out of your fucking sight and now see. I didn't mean to let her roam to that side. I just wanted her to see what's it like to be a little girl in the park. I didn't know she'd meet Mariana's best friend and speak for the first time that she wants him. You are going to fucking regret this, Ella. I will make sure I beat the shitty emotions out of her. No, please don't. She's just a child, please. No, please don't hurt me, no, please. Don't. Mia began to tremble on the floor, crying and shaking like a fish that was taken out of water. She curled up like a child, hugging her knees to her chest. She wanted to snap out of her trauma, but this attack was worse than any trauma attack she'd ever experienced. She couldn't see the images of the memories, but she felt herself experiencing it like it was happening. Please, don't hurt me. Please, she cried. Her breathing turned labored, and her heartbeat began to slow down. Slowly but gradually, she began to fall into darkness. It was consuming her, and she felt herself fading away, something her therapist had told her not to let happen. But her emotions were too shattered for her to stop herself from falling. Please. Just as she felt consumed by her emotions, a hand touched her face, and a familiar voice called her name. The voice seemed close yet distant, as if echoing from afar. The warmth of the hand started to rouse her from her daze, making her aware that someone was drawing her into a comforting embrace. Chapter 174. I slept with him. The next morning, Mia woke up with a banging headache that made it so hard for her to open her eyes. She felt the softness of her bed beneath her and knew she was in bed, but how she got there she struggled to remember. She remembered going into her private storeroom and holding her guitar, then, that was all she could remember. Strange. As she remained lying there with her eyes closed, trying to recall how she'd ended up on her bed again last night, she heard the door to the room open and the sound of footsteps followed in. She felt the person's warm hand on her forehead which prompted her to slowly open her eyes, but she was immediately enveloped in the person's embrace. Oh my goodness. Mia, you scared the imaginary baby out of me last night, exclaimed Rain in relief as she tightened her hold around Mia, who looked confused at first before embracing her back. She'd been worried about Mia ever since the military had tracked their secret calls, and yesterday when she'd heard on the news that her friend was back home, she'd rushed here in the middle of the night, not caring how late it was, only to meet her poor friend curled up in a room filled with her old memories. I missed you so much, my baby girl, Rain muttered into Mia's hair. I missed you, too. She managed a convincing, sincere laugh that didn't reach her eyes, even though she missed her best friend more than she thought she did. I brought you some hot soup, it will help you relax, Rain said, moving away from the hug and placing the tray she'd brought in along with her on Mia's lap. Drink up, because my dear, you have a ton of explaining to do. I want to hear everything about what happened, every single detail. Mia knew there was no escaping from Rain, and she had no intentions of hiding anything from her best friend, anyway. She sat up straighter on the bed and began to slowly blow on the hot soup. Rain didn't budge the whole time it took Mia to finish the bowl of soup. After the housekeeper came in to clear the plates, Rain crossed her arms against her chest and gave Mia a long, mischievous look. Now, let's talk about your one-week adventure with Mr. Wayner. How did it happen? Before Mia could begin speaking, she heard a slight commotion outside her room and glanced towards the door with a frown. Do I have a visitor at home? She inquired, turning to Rain. Rain reacted by slapping her hand against her forehead as if she had forgotten to inform Mia of something earlier and had just recalled it. That must be Owen. He was here last night. I called him when I couldn't lift you off the floor. He had summoned a doctor to examine you, and the doctor confirmed that it was nothing serious, just that you needed some rest. However, he was called to the office earlier this morning. He must have returned. Rain's voice trailed off as Mia gave her a long, pained look. What? Have I done something wrong? I would have preferred if you had left me there rather than calling Owen over, Mia murmured, rubbing her head as a headache started to form at the mention of Owen being in the house. She wasn't looking forward to seeing him today after the events of yesterday. Owen had left with the military before she could inform him that she was no longer engaged to him. Now that he was here, she had no desire to discuss that topic with him or even see his face. During her 1-week stay with Neil, Mia had realized how little she loved Owen and how much she had pretended to enjoy his presence over the past 5 years, knowing deep down that she didn't. Before Mia could think of pretending to fall asleep so she wouldn't have to face him now, he walked into the room. Striding over to the bed, he enveloped her in his arms. Thank goodness you're awake. I was worried last night, my love. How are you feeling? He inquired, brushing away the stray strands of hair from her face and caressing her cheeks tenderly. Despite the urge to pull away, Mia decided to let it pass, knowing this would be the final time he could freely touch her or address her with endearing terms that made her cringe inwardly. I'm fine, she replied shortly, reclining to evade the imminent kiss she knew he was about to bestow upon her. Rain, noticing how her friend was trying to avoid Owen, frowned. For the past 5 years, Mia and Owen had had a good relationship where they never even argued about anything, but now it seemed something was wrong after just 1 week of her absence. What could have happened in Mia's absence to have made her change her mind about Owen? Owen, who sat at the bedside, had also noticed the change, but he tried to pretend he didn't because whatever happened, she was his alone, and he'd do anything to make sure Neil's name would never get cleared in this lifetime and they'd never meet again. I heard you've agreed to go for the news conference in the afternoon. Why? He asked, deciding to talk about that instead of sitting in a silence he knew would accompany the words she'd wanted to tell him yesterday. I agreed because I have nothing to hide from the people. I will tell them everything about Neil and what I think of him. She told him, feeling happy that she'd finally be able to do something for Neil today. What do you plan to say in the conference? He asked calmly, but deep down he was seething. You'll find out soon, she said, getting off the bed to start preparing rather than sitting on the bed and staying in his presence. But he reached out his hand and grabbed her arm. Mia, the military thinks you're hiding something from them. They think there is something you are not saying. What is it? She pulled her arm away from his grip and said, I already told them everything I know. I hid nothing from them about Neil. Mia, I know there is something you are not telling the military, but you can tell me. It's okay. He coaxed, wanting to confirm if Wayner had forced himself on her while she was with him for all those days. He didn't want to hear about the ring, but he wanted answers to that question so he could think of a good punishment for the bastard once he got his hands on him. I will say this once again, Owen, Mia said angrily, knowing that he wanted more answers than what he'd heard her tell the soldiers yesterday. I didn't hide anything from them. You aren't telling the entire truth, Mia. I want to know if Wayner fucking raped you, he said in a sharp tone he'd never used on her in the past 5 years. Mia stared hard at Owen, trying to tell herself not to slap him for saying such a thing. Then she thought she could slap him in some other way by telling him the truth. You want to know the truth, don't you? Yes. I took off your ring because I no longer want to be engaged with you, Mr. Sullivan. I never wanted to tell you this in such a manner, but you've been pushing me too hard. She informed him without caring how he'd feel. She didn't even wait to read his expression and began to walk towards the door, but he grabbed her arm again, this time, harder than he'd done the first time. Did he force you to tell me this? He demanded coolly. Did Wayner threaten you to break up our engagement? Answer me, damn it. He tightened his grip around her arm with a force that threatened to crush her fragile bone. Wincing, she tried to pull away from him, but he tugged her towards him. Don't push your luck, Mia. Answer me. She felt a chill down her spine as his blue eyes savagely bore into hers, like he'd strangle her to her death if she were to lie to him. She'd seen Neil angry many times, but not once had she felt like he'd hurt her if she were to say something wrong, like she felt with Owen now. Has it occurred to you that whatever happened between Neil and I is none of your business? Everything that concerns you is my business, my love. I overlooked the fact that you whored around with him in the past, but I won't overlook that again. Now, if you don't want me to resort to force you to speak the truth, start talking," he warned. Mia felt as if he'd hit her in the stomach. She couldn't believe she'd made such a terrible mistake by trusting Owen and agreeing to marry him years ago. She was suddenly grateful that she'd seen this part of him again to remember why she'd stopped being friends with him 5 years ago. "You want to know the truth? Then I will tell you the truth," she said, angry at herself for making the mistake of giving Owen the right to handle her the way he was doing now. "I told the military that Neil did not physically abuse me in any way, and he didn't. He risked his life trying to save mine, and not even you, who obviously despise him, can twist that into physical abuse. He did not hurt me. He did not rape me. I slept with him." She told him what she knew he didn't expect, and felt as his grip left her arm. "I slept with him because I love him and I enjoyed it. And I would have gone on sleeping with him for the rest of my life if he'd have wanted me to. Are you satisfied now? Is that enough for you? I hope it is, because that's all I have left to tell you." And if, before she could complete her words, a resounding slap landed on her right cheek that forced her head to jerk sideways. Immediately, she felt the taste of blood in her mouth, and her eyes burned with pain and tears. Chapter 175. Get out of my house. Mia's hand remained pressed against her burning cheek, shocked and motionless. She couldn't believe Owen had dared to raise his hand to her. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to shed any for someone like Owen. A week ago, she had considered meeting Neil a misfortune, but now she saw it as an awakening. Through Neil, she had remembered her former self from 5 years ago and had also come to realize Owen's true nature as a psychopath. Wiping away the blood trickling down the side of her mouth, she glared up at him with a newfound anger she never knew she had. She noticed a flicker of remorse in his eyes as he saw her bleeding lip, but she paid it no mind. He had crossed a line by striking her. "Oh Lord, I didn't mean to hit," he began, reaching out towards her face, but she swiftly stepped back, creating a permanent rift between them. "Get out of my house," she spoke softly, her expression void of emotion. "Never come back here. I am no longer your friend or your fiancé. Mia, you're not thinking clearly. Please don't do this to us," he began to say before she interrupted him abruptly. "There is no us, Owen. There never was. Get out of my house," she shouted, pointing towards the door. Owen's remorse was immediately replaced by anger, and unable to control the rage he felt by her dismissal, he refused to leave. "I'm not leaving. You're mine, my love. Our wedding is in a month, and I won't let you go because I know Wayner has threatened you to end things with me. I love you, and I'll prove it to you," he declared, forcefully grabbing her arms before she could react and pulling her closer, attempting to kiss her against her will while roughly trying to remove her robe at the same time he kissed her. Despite Mia's struggles and attempts to resist, Owen's grip was too strong for her. In a frantic effort to stop him from advancing further in his acts, she bit down hard on his lips. As he recoiled in pain, she screamed for help, calling out for Rain, who had stepped out to give them privacy. Before she could scream again, Owen violently yanked her hair and pushed her onto the bed, unfastening his belt. Realizing his intentions, Mia widened her eyes in fear as she moved back. With Rain out of the room and the housekeeper's quarter distant from hers, she knew she was in a vulnerable position. "I love you, Mia. Let me show you," Owen whispered harshly as he restrained her, pinning her wrists above her head and forcing himself upon her. Despite her resistance, tears streamed down Mia's face as she felt helpless and violated. Every touch from him made her skin crawl, and she was overwhelmed with disgust and revulsion as he continued to kiss her body in a way that made her want to strangle him to his death. Every single sound of her clothes tearing set a trembling fear into her heart that he'd take her with no one helping her. She'd woken up feeling weak this morning, and her terrible headache had made it worse. Fighting him in her weakened condition seemed like an impossible thing to do, and she could tell he knew she wasn't in a healthy condition. He began to fumble with her underwear, but she immediately pressed her legs together and screamed again, "Get off me, you bastard! Don't fight it, Mia. I know you want me inside you. You've always wanted me in whispering way. Let me be one with you. Nobody will hear you because I've sent the housekeeper away," he whispered, tearing her nightgown and exposing her chest. Suddenly, he leaned in and began sucking on her nipple while using his other hand to squeeze her breast forcefully. Just when Mia thought no one would come to her aid, the door to her room burst open and Rain rushed in, exclaiming, "Mia, what's Her eyes widened at the distressing scene before her. Without hesitation, Rain stood in front of the bed and kicked Owen off with such force that he tumbled to the floor. Rain didn't stop there. She utilized her combat skills, delivering an uppercut kick to his face and following it up with a powerful blow to his abdomen. After incapacitating him, she quickly covered her friend with the blanket. "Oh my goodness, Mia. I am sorry I left you alone with this animal." She pulled the crying Mia into her arms while keeping alarmed eyes on Owen, who was struggling to get to his feet again. "If you dare come any closer to my friend, I will make sure I deprive you of your manhood," Rain warned when he started to walk towards the bed, only to stop short from her threat. "My brother is a soldier and my father is a well-known businessman. I have many men surrounding this premises. All I have to do is press a button on my ring and your beautiful CEO image will come crumbling down. If you know what's good for you, get the hell out of here." "Rain, I can explain. It's not what you think. Mia and I are just having fun. She's my fiancé, and if you would just give me a few minutes of privacy with her, I'd like to apologize for my mistakes." Tell him to leave, Rain. I don't want to ever see his face in my house or anywhere close to me," Mia cried out, trembling slightly from the fear he'd imprinted in her a moment ago. She'd never felt this kind of fear in a long time, not even when Neil took her to the mountains under gunpoint. "You heard her, get out." Owen looked at Mia and knew it wasn't the right time to apologize. He didn't mean to anger her. He just wanted to prove his love by giving her what he knew she'd always wanted. But since he'd angered her, he'd let her relax and come back another time to apologize. At least now he knew in her shaken condition, she wouldn't be able to face the press and give whatever speech she intended to give about Wayner. "All right, I will leave. Please take care of yourself," he said, then glanced at her one last time with an expression that says, "See you again next time," and then he left, closing the door behind him gently. As soon as he left, Mia crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched the blanket tightly to her trembling form. "I need to wash away his touch," she murmured through choked sobs. "You'll shower soon, but let me see your face," Rain insisted, her heart aching at the sight of Mia's swollen cheek. Anger surged within her as she held her friend close, vowing, "I'll make sure he pays for this. How dare he hurt you? I should never have left you alone with him. I'm sorry." Mia surrendered to her grief, collapsing fully into Rain's comforting embrace. I despise my life," she confessed brokenly. "First, I lost the man I loved because he didn't want me anymore, and now I almost. I don't want any man in my life. They're all monsters. I hate them all, and yet I miss him. I hate them all, and yet I yearn for his touch again. Is that foolish? To crave someone who doesn't want you?" Rain's heart shattered at her friend's anguish, even though she couldn't fully understand what she meant. Her hand continued to soothingly trace circles on Mia's back. "Yes, all men are monsters, but you're not foolish. Owen doesn't deserve you. He's despicable. Owen is a fiend. I loathe him, but I can't bring myself to hate my ice cube. He's the kindest soul I've ever known. Despite everything, I love him deeply. I want to return to him, to the mountains, to find solace forever. I don't feel at home here anymore. This isn't home," Mia lamented, her voice heavy with despair and hurt. Mia allowed herself to cry in Rain's embrace for almost an hour. She cried until she no longer had the energy to cry or to move her limbs anymore. She couldn't even walk to the bathroom until Rain assisted her and helped her to shower in silence. The entire time it took for her to wash her body, like she wanted to change her skin, her phone had been filled with dozens of missed calls by the time she got out in her robe. "I don't think you should answer that now. You are not in the condition." Rain spoke for the first time after the prolonged silence that followed Mia's breakdown when she saw that Mia was about to pick the call of her manager. "I can handle it. It's just a call. It's not like I'll be showing up for work yet." She managed a smile as she answered the call, but her smile slowly slipped away as she heard what her manager told her. "All right, I will take a look at my Twitter," she said, ending the call and sitting down on the edge of the bed to see the trends about her that were now going viral on Twitter. She knew after the allegation that she was Neil's accomplice, people weren't going to take that easy now that she was back. Nonetheless, she didn't expect the trend to be this bad when she logged into her Twitter, and to make matters worse, she was tagged in every single tweet online. The first trending hashtag post she saw was, "Our infamous presenter is now a confirmed murderer. Mia Harrison killed her mother along with her lover. said another tweet where the comments under it were sickening to the core. Miss Harrison is a cunning bitch right from the start. She should have been locked in prison as well for her crimes. May Miss Foster's innocent soul rest in peace, and may the devil who caused her death be caught as well. Wayner is a monster that should be recaptured, and I wish Miss Harrison will be taken into custody as well. I have never really liked that Mia Harrison. I don't even watch any of her shows, but my YouTube algorithm keeps shoving it into my face every time. Someone who climbed up the social ladder with a death case shouldn't be given fame like she's having. I don't normally go to church, but I went there yesterday to pray she and Neil be captured and sentenced to death for their evil deeds. We want update on Wayner's death very soon. There is no need to return him to prison. He should be killed on sight mercilessly. #We hate Wayner and pray he dies a tragic death.